To learn about New Zealand, New Zealand is a Pacific island nation located in the Southwest Pacific Ocean. The North Island and the South Island are the two main landmasses with over 700 tiny islands in between. The islands of New Zealand were the only other significant habitable territory to be colonized by people due to their remoteness. Polynesians began to settle on the islands around the year 1280 and created a distinct Maori culture by the year 1350. Abel Tasman, a Dutch adventurer, was the first European to go there and record New Zealand in 1642. The Treaty of Waitangi, which recognized British dominion from all islands in its English translation, was made in 1840 by representatives of the United Kingdom and Mauritius. New Zealand had become a colony of the British Empire in 1841 and then a territory in 1907. It acquired complete formal independence in 1947, but the British monarch kept in charge. On a national level, judicial power is vested in an election parliamentary system, while executive political power is taken by the cabinet, which is now led by Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. The country's monarchy, Queen Elizabeth II, is represented by the Governor-General. Furthermore, New Zealand is divided into 11 regional councils and 67 territorial authorities for local government reasons. Tokelau, a dependent territory, the Cook Islands and new self-governing nations in individual liberty with New Zealand, and the Ross Dependence, which is New Zealand's claim to Antarctica, are all part of the realm of New Zealand. New Zealand belongs to the United Nations, UN, Commonwealth of Nations, and thus OECD, ASEAN Plus 6, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, Pacific Community, and Pacific Islands Forum. Presently, Europeans make up the majority of New Zealand's home to nearly 5.1 million people. The largest minority are the indigenous Maori, followed by Asians and Pacific Islanders. New Zealand is a developed country that does well in international rankings of performance indicators in relation to quality of life, educational, privacy rights protection, transparency in government, and economic equality. However, during the 1980s, New Zealand's economy going through many changes, transforming it from a protective to liberalization of free trade economy. The hospitality industry, preceded by the manufacturing industry and agriculture, leads the national economy. Tourism from other countries is also an important source of earnings. In addition, New Zealand is one of the last huge mainland that people have colonized. Although latest archaeological and genetic investigations points to a date not earlier than about 1280, with at least the basic maturity period between about the year of 1320 and 1350, consistent with fact based on genealogical cultures, radiocarbon dating, evidence of deforestation, and mitochondrial DNA variability within Maori populations recommend that Eastern Polynesians initially sorted the New Zealand archipelago between 1250 and 1300. This marked the end of a long sequence of trips via Pacific Islands. The islands were dubbed Staten Land by the first European visitor to New Zealand, Dutch explorer Abel Tasman, who thought they seemed to have been part of the Staten Land that Jacob Lemaire had observed off the southern tip of South America. In 1643, Dutch topographic maps demonstrated that the South American territory was a remote island, and Tasman's finding was called Nova Zealandia from Latin after the Dutch province of New Zealand. New Zealand was subsequently anglicized from its name in 2009, the New Zealand Geographic Board uncovered that the names of the North and South Islands had never been validated, and in 2013, names and alternate names were officially accepted.
Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. Today I'm going to explain on national cultural background, on multicultural interaction, multi-religion influence, multi-level of education, and migration of population. Okay. At New Zealand, most of the cultures are dominated by Maori cultures such as wood construction, wood carving, decorating meeting houses, Maori dances and songs, and meetings. For example, when Maoris are having meeting or funeral gatherings, they are supposed to wear traditional clothes and performing an ancient greetings. So as for greetings, they are known as hongi, where two people are supposed to press their nose and forehead while holding their hands and breath simultaneously. So during the meeting, they are performing a powiri, a culture whereby their guests are supposed to play a traditional games to test whether their guests are friends or enemies by using speech and songs. So the next one is New Zealand has 3 official languages, which are English, Te Reo Maori language, and New Zealand Sign Language. New Zealand also has declared a declaration of Treaty of Waitangi among British Crown representatives and Maori Rangatira to discuss about Maori's culture, rights and responsibilities. They had agreed to divide Maoris into 2 main groups, which are the Crown Maori and Pakeha. Before multi-religion influence, New Zealanders are mostly from Maori religion before Europeans decided to popularize Christians, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jewish and atheists. So since they had variation of religions, hence they also had variation of ethnicity and customs, such as fasting period during Ramadan month for Muslims, Hindus with restriction for not consuming any beef products, and Buddhists are preferable to wear bright colors during celebrations to attract good fortunes. So they also had several public holidays such as Eid al-Fitr, Vesak Day, Christmas and Festival of Lights. So at New Zealand, they also had celebrate several public holidays such as Matariki Day for Maoris according to Maori lunar calendar on June, Anzac Day on 25th of April to honor people who had served during World War I, and Waitangi Day on February to celebrate Treaty of Waitangi Declaration. In multi-level of education, New Zealand has introduced trends in international mathematics and science study teams and Best Evidence Synthesis Program BES to prioritize on mathematics and science subjects for students from different years and levels. In New Zealand education system, they had introduced 2 types of curriculum, which are Early Childhood Curriculum T1T and New Zealand Curriculum, which are based on 2 types of documents, which are T Marau Tanga O A T Rua and New Zealand Curriculum. Last but not least, migration of population. According to the first graph, you can see that Pakeha recorded the highest number of population with 74%, whereas for the second graph, you can see that there are increase of migrants in between 2009 to 2019, especially onward. From this graph, we can assume that expatriates are preferred to work at New Zealand because of complete facilities and suitable environment for them to work long hours at their workplace. To support the argument, studies from Tabur et al. In 2015 states that Chinese workers are preferred to work at New Zealand because of work-life balance and access to nature compared to Hong Kong, which is an active state. At the same time, their administrative process, especially on visa access and resident applications, are much easier, perception of being welcome among locals, and excellent social service influence expatriates to settle down with their families at New Zealand.
I'm going to talk about the cultural and historical analysis in New Zealand. So, first one, in the early European settlement, apart from prisoner fleeing Australia and stranded or deserting sailors seeking refuge with Maori tribes, who is the earliest Europeans in New Zealand came for money, seeking humble New Zealand flags and building. Some towns of land-based by whalers were established by European companies and Cororadeca. On the northeastern North Islands became a stopover for American, British, and French sea whalers. Maori migrated to other countries, some as far as England. Hongi Hika, a northern chief, accumulated gifts in New Zealand and wept them for basket in Australia, then conducted deadly war on traditional foes in New Zealand. The use of guns extended southward, and a series of tribal battles erupted from north to south, displacing people and disrupting land holdings, particularly in the Waikato, Taranaki, and Cook Strait regions. All of these newcomers had a significant impact on Maori society. New values, aspirations, and beliefs altered tribal structures as a result of warfare and sickness. And then the British administration decided on annexation, at least in part, in 1838. It appointed naval officer William Hobson as lieutenant governor and Maori chief consul in 1839, and he conquered the entire country, the North Islands by right of cession from the Maori chief, and the South Island the right of discovery. Planning for the first English colony began even before annexation was declared. The New Zealand Company created in 1839 the colonies on Edward Gibbon Wakefield's belief, dispatched a service ship, the Tory, in May 1839. The agents on board were tasked with possessing land on both islands in the Cook Strait area. The corporation expanded quickly because its founders anticipated British annexation, which would result in a crown monopoly on property sales and a price increase. The Maori were alarmed by colonization and government in the early 1840s. Te Rao Paraha, a powerful chief in the Cook Strait area, opposed settlement. There was an open battle around the base of the islands, and Colorado Cay was often raided. Hobson, who died in 1842, and his successor Robert Fitzroy were both unsuccessful in defeating the Maori George. Ethnic and economic strife had given rise to political unrest by the end of 1840s. Apart from Auckland, the major settlements began to push for representative government to replace grave personal control. Then, for the responsible government, New Zealand was divided into 6 provinces after 1853 Constitution Act, each with its own superintendent and provincial council. Auckland, New Plymouth, Wellington, Nelson, Canterbury, and Otago. The central government consisted of a government and a 2-chamber legislature, a crown nominated legislative council, and a House of Representatives elected for a 5-year term on a law property franchise. And then, during the 1850s, New Zealand were governed mostly by provincial institutions rather than by a central authority. These authorities, which numbered 10 by the time they were abolished in 1876, had the direct impact of settlers through land administration, immigration control, and public works regulation. Land sales revenue was used by each province, and the province range was based on the revenue. With small Maori population, Canterbury and Otago cultivated prosperity by investing in communication, immigration, and education. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Hafizuddin and I will be briefing about national cultural identities. The term culture refers to the accumulated characteristic and information that are associated with a particular group, such as the group's custom, language, religion, cuisine, music, practice, and values. Culture often defines what is considered to be pleasing, and as a result, it has an effect on the method in which person behave, their mentalities, and their feelings. First and foremost, the religion. As a brief information, most of New Zealanders citizen was professing to Christianity religion. The Christianity leading their citizen belief with 15.4 accumulated believers. Christian in New Zealand can be diversified into some different beliefs even though they are labeled as Christian, such as Protestant Christianity with 10.1% population, Catholic Christianity with 11.9%, and some others believe. The percentage of individuals who identify with non-Christian religions are minority, since they were the majority with 15.4%. The other religions that prohibited in New Zealand, such as Buddhism 1.3%, Maori religion, Hinduism with 2.7%, Islam with 1.3%, and Buddhist with 1.1%. There were also some other religions and believers of Roman Catholic, Baptist, and others old religious like tribal Maori that hard to be found nowadays and may only can be found in this country. Second, languages. In this entire world, there were hundreds of communication methods and languages that distinguish and differentiate others' dialect. This language is used as a primary source of communication between two people and other sides. The primary language and speaking native for New Zealanders initially were Maori with majority speakers. Over the course of several hundred years in Aotearoa, the Maori language developed. There were regional differences which most likely became more pronounced because of the greater isolation of the local population of the Polynesia. Second, the second language of the New Zealanders is the worldwide used language and can be found in the most countries near them, which is English languages. An accumulated of 3.425 million speakers in New Zealand are fluent and were using English as their main form of communications in this country. It is recorded as the most used language in here with 90% data of users in New Zealanders. It is recorded as the most used language because of its status as an international language. English is gradually overtaking a number of other languages as the main form of communication in a number of nations, including the New Zealand country. Nevertheless, effort to preserve New Zealand native, which is Maori language, and in ensuring that it does not become an extinct language, can be proud of. Third, we will talk about the New Zealand cuisine. New Zealand is a land of agriculture that had been focused on agriculture economy as their main sources of income for their countries. Since then, their taste bud and consumables were around their harvest either from land or sea. The cuisine in here is very influenced by nations around Pacific Rim, including the New American, Southeast Asia, East Asian, and South Asian. New Zealanders also adapted some Mediterranean-based style of cooking and spices. And the last point is the New Zealand culture. New Zealanders, which is Kiwis people, are researched to be having very etiquette manners with each others in workplace and lifestyles as to be compared to their neighboring countries, Australians. Etiquette manners in New Zealanders are always viewed as low assertiveness in their people, which is their country are very fond into cooperation and warm relationship. This cultural cooperation can lead to a harmony residency and very environmentally friendly places to be visited. Nevertheless, the New Zealanders tend to have low assertiveness. They commonly show their eager and aggressiveness in their men's sportsmanship, which is rugby. The desirability and standards were high. The domination is commonly portrayed in the rugby games that can be seen as their cultural sports. Over half of the population in New Zealand in sports is their primary form of recreational exercises. Ironically, this country team has a unique haka performance that can be classified as their cultural standards before or after the game started to boost up their self-esteem. The performance of the haka called is kamete by the All Blacks players is the highlight of the beginning of each and every match that they play in. This is a traditional Maori scream that is accompanied by rhythmic motions, stamping and furious gestures. The do's and don'ts in New Zealand. First is do's. In New Zealand, which is it is an agriculture economic based country. New Zealanders are found to support their own sellers in their own nation. The Kiwis are very supportive towards their small and medium businesses, SMEs business, instead of buying from imported vendors and consumable product from others vendors. Second, New Zealanders did not take tips. It may be accepted in other nations to be given tips for goods in restaurants or e-hailing work, but it wasn't and it is prohibited in New Zealand. And last but not least, don't in New Zealand. In New Zealand, smoking is very prohibited and banned. This is a restriction to prevent any citizen and visitors to light a cigar and smokes in public, including public transport, restaurants and pubs. We can get compound if get caught smoking in public and facing the consequences such as our visa revoked. It is important not to get New Zealanders and Australian mixed up. The relationship between the two nations can be described as one of friendly rivalry, with each nation occasionally making light-hearted jokes at others. That's all from me. Thank you.
National Cultural Analysis. According to Marcus and Kitayama and Trangius, cultural differences can be known by independent and dependent concepts that shows a person-related or individualism's culture. The creative New Zealand country national culture will focus on the arts funding, give annual grants in support of theatre, music, modern dance and ballet, opera and literature. Apart from that, New Zealand also known by the first country as to introduce and begin a fund to compensate writers because of the loss of royalties for borrowing books from libraries compared to purchasing it. Maori known as Tangata Wenyo, who are native people that live in New Zealand for a millennia. Other than that, New Zealand culture includes dependability, inventiveness, bravery, sensitivity, global-mindedness, and humility. In addition, the Maori culture in New Zealand can be seen by almost 50% of the total population. Based on the traditional activities, Maori people have the strong connection with their spirituality, which belief of their cultures since many years ago. Europeans became the influencer of the New Zealanders by modernizing the technology's age and also Christianized to make their culture alive for a long years. Although it is influenced, the traditional language is still used as a language in New Zealand and ceremonies are celebrated by the nation as usual. Other than that, Maori or New Zealanders live in the community by strengthening and maintain link to cultural traditions to make sure the culture is not lost. Maori are more collectivistic people compared to other New Zealanders because their culture and traditions are more high value on loyalty and belonging to the tribe. Furthermore, the Maori people can be differentiated with New Zealanders, where the Maori are more reserved in their aspects and attitudes. The Maori people feel recognized of their hardworking, calm, patient and good humor people attitude. On the other hand, New Zealanders also very open-minded, especially on collecting and gaining new ideas, difference and change for their country. They respect and proud of their culture and historically social attitudes. For example, New Zealand was known as the first country to allow women to vote. Everyone as a citizen should have equal opportunities to get their right and better environment, which shows the culture also can accept a differences in their society. People who are financially better tend to be right and better viewed by other people compared to people who privilege was simply acknowledged as better off than others. There were assumptions that a middle-income citizens or people are called as a poor people, while higher income are rich people, but there is no formal class structure in society. A person's level of education is not trademark of their status and respect, but it is a key of advantage in therefore some life achievement. Furthermore, the social of a country will connect with the ethnicity, which is the native people of New Zealand. Maori and Pacific Islanders were disadvantages compared to wild majority. A majority of non-Maori Pacific Islanders were from Cook Islands, Samoa, Tonga, Tokelau, and Fiji. A non-Maori live in many areas and cities and search for employment of family seasons by moving to one region to another region. Although many cultural traditions or activities being followed and maintained by the Maori, the New Zealanders, it has been modern day by day until today. For an example, a relationship of Maori was determined by using particularly hierarchically with a strongly particular culture. This culture changes as gender equality, especially females' respect and authority and also opinion has become secondary in their culture. This is because Maori women has power by holding their position in that country. Although they have power, male will be the master while women's involvement in traditional male ceremonies is still determined by the people of those tribes.
New Zealand lifestyle is hospitable to individuals from various nations and cultures. They cherish compassion, understanding, and brotherhood as a country. They are tolerant among all religions and support everyone's conscience and religion, expression, and belief. New Zealanders are usually laid-back, upbeat individuals who like working hard, spending time with loved ones, and seeing their wonderful nation. They are pleasant and open-minded persons. The culture of New Zealand is characterized by a strong individualism character. The do-it-yourself mentality fosters soul, originality, and fearlessness. Some who accomplish overly or demonstrate vanity are prone to be hated and swiftly mocked. As a result, in order to avoid looking arrogant, New Zealanders attempt to be modest about their accomplishment and essentially safe. Apparent sociality inequalities in civilization often correspond with nationality. Indigenous, Maori, and Pacific Islanders continue to be substantially underprivileged in comparison towards the white population. New Zealand has having a low level of collectivism, whereas the total average of 3.67 is only slightly lower than the scale center, and it ranked third among all the countries. New Zealand European culture icon have independent element that can flow over into the family attitudes. Group of New Zealanders are keen to be break away from their families and pursue their own way, generally beginning with a overseas experience. It is unusual for adults to live with elderly relatives. Approximately 70% of whom have a one family, which is described as a husband and wife, even without unmarried children living at home. One-person home will be the next largest segment, accounting for about 20% of all households. New Zealand has always had an extensive welfare system. Unlike all other countries, New Zealand plan is the payment are supported by the tax collected and employees and wage earners are not required to contribute to the social safety net system on a regular basis. This lowers the hazard of not saving and it may inspire a leave for their approach. The culture idea of freedom stands in stark contrast to the initial interest in social security. This originates from a pioneering past as well as a history of individuals arriving to a new area and succeeding by their own effort. People receiving welfare benefit have been labeled as dole barges as a result of the viewpoint. Inquired about people's opinions of who is to blame for poverty and hardship in New Zealand, whereas the majority of respondents blame it on external factors such as injustice, unfairness, and poor luck. The one most preferred argument was flawed. According to the writer, sympathy again for poor and impoverished in New Zealand may not be as firmly ingrained as that might be. Most ordinary workers felt that by individual effort, people might claw their way from out-income reliance and eventually into property ownership. Class barriers to success were not as widespread as they had been in Victorian Britain. There was no necessity for family relation, financial support, intellectual aptitude. New Zealand through English ordinary law, the expert relationship but highlight their relative weakness. Few homes had servants and the like interaction did not have the same level of reverence and subservience the country's pioneering settlement passed along with its reliance on agriculture gave birth a great save of the New Zealand like a nation of independent thinkers amid a spectacular rural environment. This topic has a gloomy aspect in literary form with just an underlying feeling of isolation and detachment.
Recommendations. There are few recommendations to maintain and protect New Zealand's culture and traditions for better generation in future and also country's social activities. Firstly, society should provide something advantageous to their cultures. This is because society are connected with the political, social, cultural, environment, economic, ethnic or religions where they have much knowledge about their culture and traditions by developing and flourish. Apart from that, the strong government leaderships and directions are required. A new ministerial portfolio which is from outside of cabinet should be created for diversity, inclusions and ethnic communities. This is because in New Zealand, issues of social cohesion, social inclusion and diversity are being applied not only to the ethnic communities but also to the New Zealanders. Furthermore, public sector agencies also should take some steps in particular activities. This includes promoting the well-being of ethnic communities by providing some advice and good gesture to the public sector and the government. This focus on the challenges prioritize, which includes the strategy on how to give the advice that relates to medium to long-term trends in factors that affect the well-being in ethnic communities. New Zealand public service need to be working by giving priority for all public sector agencies as the public service are connected to the New Zealand population. There are much need focus on the Public Service Commissioner and the Chief Executive to involve in the counter-terrorism effort. Furthermore, New Zealand's education systems also need to be focused and improved by provides an opportunity to upgrade children and young people knowledge and skills by giving them some diversity and training and also for self-regulate. This is because education is important for all people to have their own skills and knowledge in order to complete themselves in society and contribute to social cohesion that give positive impact on the New Zealand country economic growth. Apart from that, a strong government leadership and direction are required. A new ministerial portfolio which is from outside of cabinet should be created for diversity, inclusion and ethnic communities. This is because in New Zealand, issues of social cohesion, social inclusion and diversity are being applied not only to the ethnic communities but also to the New Zealanders. Strong policy support are the much needed policy to undergo these solutions and ways of creating the social problem. Other than that, government also should collaborate with the communities, civil society, local government and the private sector on the development of social communities. The principal advisor of the Office of Ethnic Communities, governments in New Zealand should give some advice about the future challenges and opportunities that New Zealanders faces in that country. A better high performance of Office of Ethnic Communities which shows that great impact and positive effect on the communities which give an advantages to the country and the society. This includes an ability to help build good policies which contribute to the requirements of the communities. Other than that, government also need to achieve something that can be improved to make improvements with the New Zealand national culture. Thus, can be done by making draft framework to develop certain areas for improvements for better economic growth. Framework for development need to be monitored and evaluated with the targeted group by planning for better national culture. Government or public sector agencies need to collect more data and information on New Zealand's population to make development and improvement on the implications of New Zealand's changing ethnic and religious demographic. This is because by collecting all the data through policy responses will help the government to ensure the national culture of New Zealand citizens are as expected.
As to conclude, New Zealand is an island country in the Southwest Pacific Ocean. The New Zealand Geographic Board discovered in etymology that perhaps the name of the North and South Island was never authenticated, despite the fact that New Zealand history said that it was one of the last largest primary land that humanity inhabited. New Zealand has three major cities are Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch. Thus, among other things, New Zealand fought side by side the Allies. New Zealand signed the ANZUS Treaty of Mutual Security in 1951 and at the beginning of the 21st century. The world-famous film sequence The Lord of the Rings was created and filmed in New Zealand. In the national culture background analysis, there are four main points which are multicultural interaction, multi-religion influences, multi-level of education, and migration of population. Furthermore, the cultural and historical analysis had been discussed about four elements which are early European colonization, annexation and expansion of settlement, government that is accountable, and ethnic hatred. Therefore, national cultural identities is the identification of a country's population with their own history and contemporary heritage, ethical principles, ideal value state, identity, and so on. So in New Zealand, we can conclude there are have religion, languages, cuisine, and culture. NET is National Culture Analysis is described as a society common collective programming of the mind. Within the current local and regional context, the character of national culture can have significant effect for the company, its structures and its capacity building. Lastly, international norm can define what is behavior is normal when a decision has to be made. They grant act the credibility to bring some who disregard such norm responsible. As a result, practice analysis define the job obligation of person working at the primary level of such a profession. Then there are many recommendations can we suggest which our society should provide something advantageous to their cultures? Strong government leadership and direction are required. Need to fit for purpose laws and policies to be improved across the public sector and many more.